Okie dokie. My name is Orsola de Castro and I'm Creative Director from Somewhere, as well as the founder and curator of Estetica, which is the ethical area at London Fashion Week. I started from Somewhere in 1997 and I'm very proud as well to be here, particularly discussing the concept of useful and futile, because I feel like I've been bouncing from one to the other throughout my career. When I started in the industry, eco-fashion didn't exist. It wasn't a word, there was no such a concept. So everything that we did as a company was a creative choice. And I didn't become involved in the environment until much later. There was also an issue that when transforming second-hand clothing, particularly at the time, because it wasn't a political issue transforming second-hand clothing, some people were quite yucked, like in Japan, even though we sold brilliantly in Japan, it took some convincing them that yes, they were second-hand, but he said I washed them all by hand myself, personally, I promise. So there was a lot of work to be done in terms of dealing with the quality issue of something second-hand and dealing with the reproducibility issue of something that is second-hand. So one day I was in Vicenza and I went to visit a factory called Miles, which produces for Valentino, Brioni, Dior, Alaïa, De Chiel, you name them, they're all there. And the owner, who is a wonderful, wonderful woman, had heard about our little cashmere, jumpers with crochet, and she said, come along, I've got some jumpers for you. And I thought, brilliant, exciting, it's a factory, they're going to be first hand, not second hand, it's exciting. As I walked, they were producing what I wanted was on the floor. Now, what I started seeing was piles and piles and piles of rubbish, except this rubbish was like superfine cashmere, color charts, proofs, the gold, the most beautiful things I had ever seen, except in rubbish form. A little bit as a kind of experiment, we made a big cocktail gown with one of the Speedo dresses, and they were so impressed with it that within a few weeks I had 5,000 Speedo swimsuits in my sitting room. And again, that's been an amazing challenge. It wouldn't be immediate to think that you could do cocktail dresses out of Speedo swimsuits. I see it very simple. You're 16, you're wearing a lovely cocktail dress, you fall into the pool, you come out, you're dry again, you wait for dawn, you go swimming in the sea, you come out, you're dry again, supermarket. Anyway, we launched it at London Fashion Week in September. The Speedo PR has estimated that press coverage from the collection has reached 50 million people. I don't quite believe it, but even 10 is pretty good for me. And so here you go. I've ended up in this strange role whereby I'm asked to speak at conferences such as this one. I'm very proud of the design achievement of what we have done with From Somewhere. I'm mostly proud that I think that we have reevaluated completely the concept of rubbish in an industry which has a very strange concept of its own rubbish. The fashion industry had a wonderful record in terms of recycling itself. There was a whole industry in Prato. Lana Nuova is effectively recycled wool, and it has lost it completely due to the overproduction of the past 25 years. I very much believe that fast fashion is a trend and not ethical fashion. I very much believe that as consumers and as the public, we are beginning to look at fashion in a completely different way. I also very much believe that fashion is the most powerful medium to speak. In fashion, marries itself to politics very well. We've seen it from the French Revolution, when women were wetting their own dresses to look like they'd been out in the streets, the suffragettes shortening their skirts, what happened to denim, punk, fashion can speak. So if you eat organic broccoli, well, no one knows. If you wear a recognized ethical fashion designer, you're speaking. So it has a role in this new consumerism. It has a role in the way that we choose to lead our life these days. My personal idea is that approaching it from waste is very immediate. It's very effective. For an industry that has been hell-bent in overproducing, the idea of tidying up your own home and looking after your own waste does not just make sustainable and environmental sense, but it is also, thankfully, very exciting, very creative, very visual. It creates new jobs, it creates new roles. For me, I think that this really, I don't think that this is rocket science. I think it's the simplest thing on the planet. And if we think about one of the first rules in chemistry, in nature, nothing is created and nothing is destroyed. And that for me is just an infinitely lovelier way of saying we can recycle it. Thank you. And I also think that, you know, I say this to my students. I say, you know, in the 250 years since industrialization, we've gone against nature. We now need to invent new ways of engaging design with the industry, for instance. I mean, in a way, I feel that I'm totally married to the industry while being its parasite. So what we are creating is a parallel something which through design, because it obviously has to come through design because I have to sell the product in the end, so it has to be beautiful and desirable. But I'm working alongside an industry and creating a different function for that industry. I very much like the thought of service envy rather than product envy. And this is what I mean, the way that I see the fashion industry changing. In terms of fashion design and fashion glossification, I think that we have seen fashion as the ultimate aspiration, which is such a stupid way to go about it, to be honest with you. I mean, I find technology infinitely more aspirational than fashion. I mean, my iPad any day, or any it bag, or Manolo pairs of shoes, or whatever. I think fashion's going to go right down to earth and be much more representative of what we are. And I think that aspirations are no longer going to be us aspiring for the model, but us knowing that the people at the back and throughout the supply chain can also aspire. So I think that we are changing radically the imprint, and I think that the new generation is changing imprint. And so in that sense, to answer your question, which is unanswerable somehow, if design can have, or a project can have any influence, it has to be somehow rethought, retweaked, but also helped by the industry in this change.
Just before we go on, Orsola, I think you should stand up so people can see your dress, because you're in the dark. So, please.
Thank you for the nice presentations. I'm Esra. I also study on the exculturation and textiles. But I wondered that the recycled materials is a good contribution to the sustainable development, but conceptually it's a minor development because it still serves the fashion system, which includes the changing trends, consumption, and the need of people, the need and desire of the people who are smart and appealing and attractive, all are constituted with the fashion system. So I think for a real sustainable development about garments, the very idea of garments must be changed, of people, in the minds of the people. Because as soon as the people still see garment as a symbol of status, these developments will be minor developments. Do you think in the future can there be radical changes in people's minds of consuming the garments and consuming the garments?
I think that a lot of design will always be that of making things appealing. And I think that in a way ethical fashion has just managed to remove itself from the stigma of being unappealing. So to a certain extent I see your point. So yes, you know, aspiration. You're still making a product, you know, you're still encouraging people to buy, but at the point you have to see where we are at this point right now in history. And we're looking at the beginning of a change. And you're not going to be able to change an industry. The fashion industry is one of the most comprehensive industries that there are. It involves from agriculture to communication. So how are you going to change an industry this powerful in a very short space of time? You have to speak its language first. So my point is, let's deal right now with finding innovative solutions in order to change the industry and influence it. Then let it change itself. Because fashion is brilliantly cyclical. You can always rely on fashion to be short-lived, you know, and to move on to another form, and to move on to another, you know, form of aesthetic. So I think that that will come politically, that we will look at fashion differently, wear our clothes differently. That's a job for the younger generations, but the job for designers and people right now is to change it slowly.
Do you think that consumption should be somehow still considered a sort of passive behavior, or maybe we can say some kind of intelligence of the consumer behavior?
I think that the word that we use in itself, I mean, if you think about the consumer, it's such a horrid idea. I mean, you know, you really think of somebody consuming. I always try to use public because I feel I don't want to be a consumer. I would much rather be considered an appreciator. And I think that the main problem is that conspicuous consumption is unemotional. And it's, you know, and I come from a generation, you know, in my youth, who took a lot of drugs, you know, and they say, you know, shopaholic, all of that, you know, for me, you know, for a drug to use, it needs to be dosed for some reason, and the same with consumption. I love waiting for something. I love desiring. I love giving myself impossible goals, and, you know, but then finally achieving them, and in terms of what I want. And I think that's, you know, that's when something is truly mood altering. And this has been forgotten in the way that we consume. People consume right now. You've got £5 in your pocket, you spend it. There is you still spend it, exactly. But the point is that it has to be immediate, and it has to be, you know, straight away, and mostly it has to be crap. And, you know, the products, we don't look at things anymore because we're used to just having them. And what's interesting though is that I actually really,